Survey Instrumentation. Contents: 22.1 Introduction, 22.2 Techniques Instruments for Data Collections, 22.3 Questionnaire Construction, 22.4 Issues in Designing a Survey Instrument, 22.5 Conclusion. Learning Objectives. It is expected that after reading Unit 22, you would be able to understand the techniques of data collection, practice the art of construction questions, highlights the issue of reliability and validity in designing survey instrument. 22.1 Introduction. A reliable and valid instrument enhances the quality of data collected. If a reliable instrument is consistent and valid, it is also accurate. In other words, an instrument becomes reliable when each time it is used, the same information flows. A poorly worded survey instrument can seriously affect precision, affecting the entire research process. The researcher must be careful in developing the instrument for survey in order to enhance its quality and purpose. 22.2 Techniques or the instruments for data collection. In these sections, we will discuss the type of survey instruments, role of interviewer, stages of an interview, and an interview bias. Types of survey instruments. There are 5 principal types of instruments or techniques used in survey research. They are self-administered questionnaires, face-to-face interviews, telephone interviews, internet survey, and structured observation. Each of these instruments has its advantages and disadvantages, which are discussed below. First, a self-administered questionnaire. A self-administered questionnaire consisting of questions that an individual completes by himself or herself. Self-administered questionnaires can be mailed or completed on site, say on a computer, or by hand in classroom, waiting room, or in office. The respondents read the questions, then record their answers. So advantages: self-administered questionnaires have a clear advantages reading cost since interviews are not part of the data gathering process. The expense of interview is minimized. This reason alone probably accounts for the fact that so much of survey research is conducted by self-administered questionnaires. Another advantage of this instrument is that respondents have time to consider and ponder over questions carefully. There is no pressure to react to questions right away, as if often in the case of an interview. Some respondents feel more comfortable expressing their actual reactions to questions on sensitive topics like sex, politics, and religions on a self-administered questionnaire than they do in an interview. In a mailed questionnaire, the researchers can send questionnaires to a wide geographical area, and the respondents can complete when it is convenient and can check their personal records if necessary. Mailed questionnaires offer anonymity and avoid interviewers' bias. They have very effective and response rates are high for a target population that is well educated or has a strong interest in topics or the survey organization. Disadvantage is that the biggest disadvantage of questionnaire is low response rate. Respondent may consider questionnaire filling a waste of time. Questionnaires are less successful in those social contexts where oral traditions reign and written traditions are in the backseat. When the attempt is to reach a cross-section of population, a response rate of 10% or less may not be uncommon with questionnaires. The researchers may raise response rates by sending reminders, but this adds to the time and cost of data collection. Moreover, reminders, howsoever, may be interpreted as irritants. A partial explanation of this low response rate is that some people have a difficult time filling out questionnaires. For purposes of filling out even a simple written questionnaires, the literacy level must be high. Further, researchers cannot control the conditions under which a questionnaire is filled. For instance, if the questionnaire is completed during a get-together, there will be many other around the respondent influences answers. Some respondents may fill out the questionnaires in the presence of their family members, who may aid in giving answers. Sometimes someone other than the sample respondent may complete the questionnaire without the researcher's knowledge. Some respondents may complete the questionnaire week apart or answer questions in a different order that than that intended by researchers. Incomplete questionnaires can also be a serious problem. Researchers cannot visually observe the respondents' reactions to questions, physical characteristic, or the setting in which the questionnaires are filled. So the self-administered questionnaires format limits the kind of questions a researcher can ask. Questions requiring visualize, that is, look at the picture and tell me what you see. Open-ended questions, many contingency questions, and complex questions do poorly in self-administered questionnaires. The second method is face-to-face interview. An interview requires at least two persons, one to ask questions, the interviewer, and the other to respond, the interview. However, in some cases, group interviews are also possible. Advantages of face-to-face interview is generally the best data gathering techniques for survey research. This approach enables the researchers to obtain information for a much larger percentage of those sampled than to do self-administered questionnaires, particularly those mailed. One reason is that it is most difficult to respondent to refuse cooperation when they have directly confronted and requested to respond to questions than when they receive a questionnaire and ask to fill it out themselves. The interviewing situation also increases the response rate because many respondents are unable to fill out a questionnaire by themselves can LV a respondent to the same questions when asked by an interviewer. To face-to-face interview enhances not only the response rate but also the quality of response. When the questions are not understood by the respondent, the interview can clarify their meaning by the use of probing questions. If respondent does not answer the questions in a proper frame of reference, an interviewer can also follow up by asking, "Could you explain what would you mean by what you just said?" The use of such probes can eventually bring the respondent around to providing the information sought by a particular question. Besides clarifying doubts, the additional questioning can add depth of information which a respondent provides. A further advantage of face-to-face interview is that the respondent can ask the clarifications to the questions. It is less likely that the false answers will be given by respondents directly to the interviewer. Disadvantage is that the advantages of face-to-face interview over self-administered questionnaires are conditional. The effectiveness of the confrontations depend upon good interviewers who achieve the respect respondents. A considerable disadvantage of face-to-face interview is that it is expensive. In fact, the cost can be prohibitive for many survey research institutions. Particularly training, supervision, and personal cost for interviews can be too high. Another disadvantage in face-to-face interview is the possibility of interviewer bias. The appearance, tone, voice, question wording, and so forth of the interviewer may affect the respondent. See the telephonic interviews. By telephonic interviews, we mean those interviews that are conducted on telephone where the voice of the interview is used. Advantages, comparatively speaking, the telephonic interview is less expensive. It can often provide a representative sample as well as that of half the cost of the face-to-face interviewing. Telephone interview is a popular survey instrument where a large number of respondents have telephones. Further, if consensus and discounts are obtained from telephone companies, it becomes far more inexpensive as an instrument of data collection. Disadvantage. People without telephone connections, normally poor people, and people with unenlisted telephone numbers, the well-to-do, and those who have recently shifted residence have to be excluded from telephone surveys. Telephone interviews yield only 1/3 of the information that could normally be obtained from face-to-face interviews. In telephonic interview, the interviewer cannot use the visual questioning techniques, that is, handing the respondents a lengthy list of alternative response categories available in self-administered and face-to-face interviews. Moreover, relatively high cost of telephone calls in many parts of the world, along with the limited interview length, are the main shortcomings of this instrument. In addition, open-end questions are difficult to use. Interviewers can only note serious disruptions, that is, background noise, and respondents' tone of voice, example anger, flippancy, or hesitancy. D. The Internet survey. Since the mid-1990s, the Internet has become a Viable and popular means of administrating questionnaires. There are two main ways which the internet has used an instrument for survey: emails and web pages. One, email surveys. Email survey questionnaires are the cheapest of all the questionnaires of survey research. They come in three different forms. First, as plain text questions inserted as part of the email. This is the most basic method of email survey, in which the respondents simply edit the mail message to indicate their response. Second, a formatted question sent as an email attachment. Third, an interactive questionnaire which can send as an attachment, answered and returned by email. Web page based surveys. These survey requires that the respondents visit a page or URL. From this they will given questionnaire. Typically respondents are recruited for web page questionnaires in one of the following ways. Pop-up questionnaires. When a person opens a web page, a questionnaire will pop up, or the respondent will be asked if he wants to go to URL to answer a questionnaire. This method of sample recruitment depends entirely on people's happening to visit the site and then agreeing to answer the questionnaire. Advertising on the sites. On the others might have advertised for the survey. This method can attract people from a wide range of site and result in a large number of responses, but is difficult to think what population such a sample represents. Listserv, news group and chat groups. Advertising. A researcher may advertise questionnaires or invite participants from people in an internet-based list. Email invitations. These may be sent to people whose email addresses are available. Researchers may use both email and web page-based surveys together also. It may be borne in mind that the shortcomings of this instrument are more or less same as those of telephonic interviews. Type of surveys and their features. So the type of instrument that we can see in a self-centered interview, telephonic interview and face-to-face questionnaire. So administrative issues are cost cheapest, but the telephonic one is moderate and face-to-face is expensive. And speed, slowest, fast, slow and to moderate. Length, number of questions, moderate number of questions. You can short. In telephone you have to ask a short number. Face to face you can use longest. Response rate is lowest in self-administrated questionnaire, and the telephone interview is moderate, and face to face it's the highest response rate. That is the administrative issue. The research control is that probes possible in this questionnaire for not possible, and in telephonic and internet things it's possible. Specific response also not possible in administrated one. And yes, to the other two questions sequence. We can change the question sequence here in telephonic and interviews, but not. Yes, question sequence. I don't know. Face to face you can do that. Okay, sorry. Not this is internet one. Only one respondent. Yeah. Here many respondent no, only one respondent. Yes. In face to face and telephonic we can do only one respondent, but in administered interview we can do in many people. Visual observation is, yes, visual observation is possible in these two, but in administrative it is not possible. Success with different questions. Visual aids, limited visual aids are there. In telephonic calls none is there, but in face to face you can have many. Open-ended questions are limited in administrated one, telephonic one limited, and face to face it is possible. Contingency questions in face to face it is possible, in telephone it is also possible, but in questionnaire it is not possible. Complex question is limited in telephonic and administrated, but in face to face it's possible. Sensitive questions, same. So in all the places same way only you can put the sensitive questions. Then sources for bias, the social desirability, no, same, worse. Interviewer bias, no interviewer bias in questionnaire, but same and worse. Okay. And respondents reading bias, yes, no. So this is then E-structured observation. E-structured observation collects data visually and is designed to guide the observer in focusing on specific actions on characteristics. For the example, two visitors to a school would be participating in a structured observation if both are asked to count and recount the number of computers they see, look for the presence or absence of their air conditioning, and measure the room's area in square feet. This is very rarely used instrument or technique in survey research. It is more frequently used in participant observation. Reflections and actions 22.1. Suppose you have a carry-out survey of waste disposal methods in your area. Which of the above discussed survey method instruments would you like to select in your survey? Give specific reasons why you would select one instrument and not any other instrument mentioned in 22.2. To the role of the interviewer in a social survey. The gather information interviews occurs in several settings. Employers interview prospective employees, doctors interview patients, mental health professionals interview clients, social workers interview the needy, reporters interviews politicians, police interviews the witness and victims. But survey research interviewing is a special kind of interviewing. As with most interviewing, its goal is to obtain as far as possible accurate information. Interview is not just about asking questions, it includes quite a bit of information about the social context in which the interview occurs. The survey interview is a social relationship. Like other social relationships, it involves social roles, norms, and expectations. The interview is a short-term, secondary social interactions between two strangers with the explicit purpose of one person obtaining specific information from the other. The social roles are also in the interviewer and the interviewee of or respondent. Information is collected in a structured conversations with which the interviewer asks pre-arranged questions and the respondent's answers. It differs in several ways for ordinary conversations. Often characteristics of the respondents and the interviewer, such as sex or race or age, affect the way either the interviewer or the respondent would reflect attitudes and behavior that is unrelated to the interview itself. An important problem of interviews is that many respondents are unfamiliar with the survey respondent's role, and respondents often do not have a clean conception of what is affected on them. As a result, they substitute another role that may affect their responses. Some believe that the interview is an intimate conversation or therapy session. Others see it as a bureaucratic exercise in completing forms. Others view it as a testing session, etc. Even in a well-designed professional survey, follow-up research found that only half of the respondents understand the questions exactly as intended by researchers. Respondents reinterpreted questions to make them applicable to their idiosyncratic personal situations or to make them easy to answer. Table 22.2, the differences between structured interview and ordinary conversation. Serial number 1, ordinary conversation. Serial and other column is structured survey interview. 1. Questions and answers from each participant are relatively or equally balanced in ordinary conversations, but in structured survey it is interviewer asks and respondent answers most of the time. In ordinary conversation there is an open exchange of feelings and opinions, but in structured survey interview only the respondent reveals feelings and opinions. In ordinary conversation, judgments are stated and attempted made to persuade the other to a particular point of view. But in structured survey interview, the interview is non-judgmental and does not try to change respondent's opinion or belief. In normal conversation, a person can reveal deep inner feeling to gain sympathy of therapeutic release. But in structured interview, interviewers try to obtain direct answers to specific questions. In ordinary conversation, ritual responses are common. Example, ooh, shaking hand, how are you, fine, etc. But in systematic interviewer avoids making ritual responses that influence respondent and also see genuine answers, not ritualistic responses. So, in ordinary conversation, the participants exchange information and correct the factual errors that they are aware. But in structured interview, the respondents provide almost all the information. Interviewer does not correct a respondent's factual errors. In normal conversation, the topics rise and falls, and either person can introduce new topics. The focus can shift direction or digress to a less relevant issues. But in structured interview, the interviewer controls the topic direction and pace. He keeps the respondents on track, and irrelevant diversions are contained. In normal conversation, the emotional tone can shift from humor to joy to affection to a sadness to anger and so on. But in structured interview, interviewer attempts to maintain a consistently warm but serious and objective tone throughout. Normal conversation, people can evade or ignore questions and give flippant or non-committal answers. But in structured interview, the respondent should not evade questions and should give truthful, thoughtful answers. Thus, the role of interview is crucial. The interviewer has to obtain cooperation, build rapport, yet remain neutral and objective. He has to encroach upon the respondent's time and privacy for information that may not directly benefit the respondent. The investigation has to try and reduce embarrassment, fear, and suspicion so that the respondent feel comfortable while revealing information. Good interviewers monitor the pace and direction of the social interaction as well as the commitment, the content of the answers, and the behavior of respondents. They are non-judgmental, do not reveal their opinions verbally or verbally or inverbally, that is, by a look or shock. A look of If a respondent asks for an interview's opinion, he politely redirects the respondent and indicate that such questions are largely inappropriate and may out of context. For instance, if a respondent asks, "What do you think?" the interviewer may answer politely, "Here we are interested in what you think. What I think doesn't matter." Likewise, if a respondent gives a shocking answer, example, "I was arrested 3 times for beating my wife," the interviewer does not show shock, surprise, or disdain, but treats the answer as a matter of fact. He helps respondents in giving truthful answers. One may ask, if survey's interviewer must be neutral and objective, why not use a robot or machine? Machine interviewing has not been very successful because it's lack human warmth, sense of trust, and rapport that an interviewer creates. An interviewer helps define the situations and ensures the respondent have the information throughout, understand what is expected, give relevant and serious answers, and are motivated to cooperate. Therefore, the interview is a social interaction in which the behavior of both interviewer and respondent stems from their attitudes, motives, and perceptions. It may also be borne in mind that the interviewers do not do more than interview respondents. See box number 22.1. In 22.1, the time allocation of interviewers' work schedule. Moser and Kelton, 1973, note that face-to-face interview respondents only about 35% of their time interviewing. About 40% is spent in locating the correct respondent, 15% in traveling, and 10% in studying the materials and dealing with the administrative aspect and recording details. Third, stages of an interview. The interview is conducted in stages, beginning with an introduction and entry. The interviewer gets into the door, shows authorization, and reassures and secures cooperation from the respondent. He is prepared for reactions such as, "How did you pick me up? What good would come out of this? I don't know about this." The interviewer should explain why a specific respondent have been choosing for interviewing and why he cannot substituted or replaced by anyone else. The main part of the interview consists of asking questions and recording answers. The interviewer asks the appropriate question in order without returning to it or skipping the questions unless the direction specify this. He goes at a comfortable pace and give non-directive feedback to maintain interest. In addition to asking questions, the interviewer record answers. This is to close-end answers, where interviewers just mark the correct box. The open-ended questions, the interviewer just is more difficult. They like to be responded carefully, record in a legible writing that is said verbatim without correcting grammar or slang. Moreover, the interviewers needs to avoid summarizing or paraphrasing because this causes a loss in information and distort answers. The interviewer should know how when to use props. A prop is a neutral request to make clear and ambiguous answers to the complete and incomplete answer or to obtain a relevant response. The interviewers recognize an irrelevant or inaccurate answers and use prop as needed. There are many props of types of props. A 3 to 5 second pause, a non-verbatim communication, that is tilt of head, raise eyebrows, eye contact, and repetition of the questions on the or the answer and then pause. Ask a neutral questions such as any other reasons. So the last stage is exit. When the interviewers thank the respondent and leaves, he then goes and quiet private place to edit the questionnaire and record other details while they are still fresh in mind. Others can include the date, time, place of interview, the thumbnail sketch of the respondent's attitude, seriously, angry or laughing, etc. The interviewer records the personal feeling also on the sides. For instance, the respondent became nervous when questions about his income. The interviewer bias. The interviewer bias falls into 6 categories: error by respondent, forgetting, embarrassment, misunderstanding, or lying because of the presence of others; unintentional error or interviewer sloppiness, contacting the wrong respondent, misreading the question, omitting questions, reading questions in a wrong order, recording the wrong answer to a question, misunderstanding the respondent; intentional subversions by interviewers, purposeful attention of answers, omission of rewarding of questions, etc. Influence due to the interviewer's expectations about a respondent's answers based on the respondent's appearance, living situation, etc. Failure of an interviewer to probe properly. Influence on answers due to interviewer's appearance, tone, attitude, reactions to answers, or comments made outside of the interview schedule. Further, there are some other factors which might influence the interviews. For example, social setting in which the interview occurs and the interviewer's social background, race, caste, gender, social class may also affect the responses. 22.3 Questionnaire Construction. All the data gathering techniques or instrument we have discussed earlier employ a set of questions to which the respondents are asked to reply. This set of questions is referred to as questionnaire for self-administered questionnaires, mail questionnaires, as well as internet survey, as an interview schedule for face-to-face interviews and telephonic interviews. This section considers the type of questionnaires and the questions, discussing the guidelines for constructing a good questionnaire or interview schedule. In this section, we will discuss the type of questionnaires, type of questions, designing a good questionnaire, and things to avoid questionnaire construction. 1. Type of questionnaires. There are 3 types of questionnaires, namely structured, unstructured, and semi-structured questionnaires. Structured questionnaires are used structured or closed questions that provide a respondent with a set of options. It's expected that he picks up one out of many. It does not give much freedom or choice to the respondent. These questionnaires are used when the respondent is highly profile person or a personal and does not want to give longer time for the interview. The unstructured questions include only the open-ended question without any options being provided to the respondent. The semi-structured questionnaires include both structured, closed, and unstructured open questions and are the most widely used in social research. Types of questionnaires: A. Structured, closed, and unstructured open-ended questionnaires. As mentioned earlier, the structured questions provide the alternative multiple choice answer from which the respondent choose an option. The following is an example. Example 1. If the general elections are held today, for which party would you vote? So this is the options as given. The alternative answers for a structured questions are printed on the questionnaire, and either the respondent or the interviewer, depending on the type of the instrument, ticks off the appropriate answer. Another example of structured question is the following. Example: how do you feel about central government's initiative to make education a fundamental right? Strongly approve, approve, ambivalent, disapprove, strongly disapprove, don't know. The questions is a better example of a structured closed question than the first one because the alternative responses cover the full range of relevant, appropriate, approving, and disapproving answers. The first question obviously fails by this criterion of completeness because it does not include current political parties, which are potential options. Notice both questions have a don't know category. It is important to have such a category for structured questions because some respondents to have some respondents likely may not know how they feel about such issues. However, the reason generally does not volunteer this as a response alternative because many respondents would use it just to avoid making a decisions among the other alternatives. On the other hand, unstructured, open-minded questions do not predetermine the possible answers from which the respondent must choose. The following is an example. What do you feel are the major problems facing our nation today? So we can have different options like poverty, uh, religious intolerance, and natural calamities, and um, poor economy, like that. Whatever the major issues we are facing, we can give as an option. Instead of providing the possible answers, the questionnaire leaves space for the respondent to answer the questions in his own words. In other words, the issue is left open. Such questionnaires have an advantage of allowing for the expression of the depth and complexity of the correspondent's feeling and attitude about a particular topic. One disadvantage of unstructured questionnaire is that they produce data which is sometimes difficult to analyze quantitatively because the categorization of the responses must take place after the data has been collected. In some cases, the answers given by respondent varies such that it becomes impossible to discern a relatively small number of respondent patterns. This problem does not occur with structured questions because the categories of response on the questionnaire becomes a category used for data analysis. Other important use of structured questions is in the measurement of abstract concepts such as anomy, social class, etc., using an index scale which combines several structured questions. It should be made clear that structured or closed and unstructured open-ended questions have their advantages and disadvantages, and that some topics areas are best covered by one and the other's questions type. For example, the issue for which there is a general agreement about the possible alternative replace best tapped by structured questions. However, structured questions sometimes inappropriately force respondents to select an answer from the irrelevant and predetermined options and choices. This is a major and potential drawback with structured questions. Unstructured questions, on the other hand, provide respondents the opportunity to open up and answer questions in their own terms. Unfortunately, such respondents are sometimes difficult to interpret and analyze. Be threatening versus non-threatening questions. Researchers are sometimes asked about sensitive issues or one that respondents may find threatening. The questions about sexual behavior, drug, alcohol use, criminal and deviant behavior, mental health, illegal activity, controversial public issues, etc., are considered to be threatening. Researchers who ask such questions must do so with extra care. Threatening questions are part of the broader issue. Respondents may be ashamed, embraced, or afraid to give a truthful answer. Instead, they give what they believe to be the normative or social desired answer. This is the social desirability bias. This social pressure can cause an over-reporting or under-reporting of the true situation. For example, people may under-report in an activity that involves deviance, sex, illness, etc. They may over-report being a good citizen, example voting, knowing about issues, etc. Being well informed and cultured, example reading, going to cultural events, fulfilling moral responsibility, example having a job, giving it to charity, or having a good family life, having a happy marriage, good relationship with children, etc. One way of addressing the threatening question is by offering explicit guarantee of confidentiality and by telling respondents that what the survey is seeking are truthful answers irrespective of what they are. They should ask questions on a sensitive topics after respondents have developed trust in an individual. They can also wait until after asking a less threatening, a warm-up material and providing a meaningful context. They can phrase questions to make it easy for a respondent to admit engaging in the threatening behavior. Another method is to have an introductory statement that states that many people engage in such a behavior and respondent certainly is not allowed. Yet another way is to use survey instruments that permits anonymity. For instance, it may be better to use a mail or self-administered questionnaire or internet survey or a telephonic interview instead of face-to-face interviews. Knowledge questions. Studies of on survey suggest that the large majority of the public cannot directly answer the questions that seeks to know the fact of or knowledge. Researchers may sometimes want to find out whether the respondent know about an issue or topics, but knowledge questions can be threatening because respondents do not want to appear ignorant. Skip or contingency question. Researchers avoid asking questions that are irrelevant or for a respondent, yet some questions apply only to specific respondent. A contingency question is a two or more part question. The question has to be the first part of the question, determine which of the two different questions select respondent from one to second question is relevant. Sometimes they are called screen or skip questions. On the basis of the questions to be first question, the respondents or an interviewer is instructed to go to another or to skip certain questions. Were you a student of social sciences? Are you a student of social sciences? Yes or no? If no, please go to the question number 2. Like that. If yes, what is the subject or discipline? How many years you have studied the subject? Like that. So now third is designing a good questionnaire, some guidelines. A good questionnaire forms an integrated whole. The research weaves questions together so they flow smoothly. A good questionnaire is clear, unambiguous, and uniformly workable. It designed most minimize potential errors from respondents. There are 2 key principles for a good survey questions: avoid confusion and keep respondents' perspective in mind. Further, questionnaire construction is an art. It takes skill, practice, patience, and creativity. The principles and guidelines for constructing a good questionnaire are following. 1A. Introduction. Every questionnaire should have an introduction which gives a description of what the study is all about. The introductions should also provide instructions for responding to the questionnaire and the promise of confidentiality. B. The order of questions. Most researchers like to begin a questionnaire with 1 or 2 questions that will be easy for answer. Such a questions about the household size, occupation, village, etc. However, it is important not to make these questions so personal that respondent will be put on the defensive or terminate the interview immediately. As a rule of thumb, the line of questioning generally is broader at the beginning than later in the questionnaire. For instance, in an apolitically oriented survey, the opening questions might probe in a general way, including some open-ended questions for the respondent's opinion on the most important issue of the day. Later in the questionnaire, the interviewer might read a list of specific issues and ask the respondent to appraise the relative importance of each one. The questions should be placed in an order with the facilities and orderly progression of the interchange between the interviewer and the respondent. One would not, for example, ask a few questions about the most important issues of the day, then skip to questions about political leaders and then skip back to more questions on the issues of the day. Then ask some questions about respondents' characteristics, then to skip back to more questions of political leaders. Further, the most personal questions are usually saved until late in the questionnaire so that if the respondent refuses to answer or terminate the interview at that point, most of the information would already have been obtained. C. Form of questionnaires. It is important to determine whether structured or unstructured questionnaires are best suited for a given objective. We have stressed the importance of interspersing both types of questions throughout the questionnaire to maintain the internet on the respondent and to be complement each other in eliciting both the closed and open-end information. Even more detailed decisions are necessary. Should a structured questions take the form of a numerical scale? For instance, rating something from 0 to 9 in terms of favorability, or a verbal scale, highly favorable, somewhat favorable, highly favorable, somewhat favorable, like that. So it is clarity. It is crucial to make sure that correspondents will be able to understand the meaning of each question. In other words, the researchers must phrase question in terms of the respondent will understand, but he must be careful not to seem patronizing to the respondent. This is often a difficult balance to achieve and is usually best gained through extensive pre-testing of alternative questions. Cross-check questions. It is a good policy to include several different questions on one topic area to see if respondents answer them in same way. Such questions allow for an appraisal of the validity of questionnaire and of the accuracy of the respondent's self-reports. A special type of cross-check question is the random probe. Each respondent is asked to explain what is meant by his or her responses to a few randomly selected questions. Different respondents are asked to do this for different structured questions. The procedure enables the researchers to eliminate from the analysis phase of research by structured questions which many respondents have misunderstood. Interviewer control. The questions required not only to elicit information, it's also to facilitate control over the quality of the interview's work. For instance, the questionnaire should explicitly instruct the interviewer what to do whenever the specific procedure might be in question. The instruction given the respondent 2 or 3 minutes to think about the question may be necessary in certain cases since some interviews are more impatient than others. It is important to let the interviewer know through the questionnaire that his work will be fully evaluated after it is completed. Not only should there be a section at the end of the questionnaire for the interviewer's signature and date of the interview, but this section should be headed with a statement like, "I certify that this is a complete and honest interview conducted in accordance with the instructions." This phrase implies a sort of commitment which helps to motivate interviewer to their best effort. Another section of validation is sometimes even more persuasive. A portion of each interviewer's work should normally be valid by the member of the research staff who either telephones or writes to a portion of interviewer's response, usually about 15%, to make certain that the interview was completed. Roughly how long it took, whether there are any irritants to the respondent, and whether the respondent confirms the answers 2 or 3 questions. It is important to let the interviewer know that this type of validation will take place, and the questionnaire may end with a section which has place for validators' comments and recommendations. Then pre-test. All the interviewing experience and wisdom in the world cannot replace the method of pre-test as a means of ensuring that all the above considerations are observed to the fullest possible extent. In a pre-test test, the post questionnaires is actually administered to a very small sample of respondents, anywhere from 10 to 100, depending on the size of the eventual sample. It is a good idea for researchers to conduct some of the interviews and from the people who will actually be administrating the eventual interviews to conduct others. Thus, the researchers can be mindful of the practical problems inherent in the questionnaire with the help of a pre-test. Sometimes several pre-tests are necessary, with the questionnaire being revised between the pre-test. What to avoid in questionnaire construction? The following aspects should be avoided while preparing the questionnaire. Avoid jargon, slang, abbreviation. Jargon and technical terms such as alienation, anomy, Oedipus complex, etc. are difficult to understand by the laypersons. Hence, they should be avoided in the questionnaire. A slang is a kind of jargon with a subculture. Members of other subcultures may not understand it. So, slang such as hot dog, snowbird, etc. should be avoided. Also, avoid abbreviation. One should avoid slangs, jargon, and abbreviation unless a specialized population is being surveyed. Avoid ambiguity, confusion, and vagueness. Ambiguity and vagueness plague a researchers engage in question construction. A researcher might make implicit assumption without thinking of the respondent. For example, the questions, "What is your income?" would be in weekly, monthly, annually, family, or personal, before taxes or after taxes, for the current year or the last year, for the salary of all the sources. The confusion causes a lot of inconsistency in how different respondent assigns meaning to an answer to the question. Another source of ambiguity is the use of definite words or response categories. For example, the answer to question, "Do you jog regularly?" yes or no, hinges on the meaning of the word regularly. Respondents may define the word regularly as every day or every week or every month. To reduce confusion, it is better to be specific. Avoid emotional language and prestige bias. Words have an implicit connotative as well as explicit denotative meanings. Likewise, titles and the positions of society carry prestige or status. Words with strong emotional connotations and stance on issues linked to people with high social status can color how respondents hear and answer survey questions. Use natural language. Avoid words with emotions. baggage because respondents maybe react to the emotionally laden words rather than the issue. Also avoid prestige bias. Associating a statement with a prestige bias or a group, respondent may answer on the basis of their feelings towards the person or group rather than addressing the issue. D. Avoid double-barreled questions. Make each question about one and only one topic. A double-barrel question consists of two or more questions joined together. It makes a respondent answers ambiguous. For example, if asked, "Are you provided accommodation and food in the hostel?" The respondent who gets only accommodation or the one who gets only food will have problems in answering. In this case, the respondent will also be not certain of the answer. Avoid leading questions. Make respondents feel that all the respondents are legitimate. Do not let them become aware of an answer that the researchers wants. A leading or a loaded question is one that leads the respondent to choose one response or another by its wording. For example, the question, "You don't smoke, do you?" leads respondents to state that they do not smoke. Further, loaded questions can be stated to get either negative or positive answers. Avoid asking questions that are beyond respondents' capability. Asking questions that only a few respondents know frustrates and produce poor quality responses among other respondents. Avoid false promises. Do not begin a questionnaire with a promise with which respondents may not agree and ask about choices regarding it. Respondents who disagree with the promise will be frustrated and do not know how to answer. For example, the questions, "The library is open too many hours. Do you want it to open for 4 hours later or close 4 hours earlier each day?" leaves those who either support the promise or oppose both alternatives without a meaningful choice. Avoid asking about future intention. Avoid asking people about what they might do under hypothetical circumstances. Responses are poor predictions of behavior. Questions such as these are a waste of time as there are abstractions without any indications to the immediate experience. Avoid double negatives. Double negatives in ordinary language are grammatically incorrect and confusing. For example, I don't got no job logically means that the respondent doesn't have a job. Avoid overlapping or unbalanced responses categories. Make response categories or choice mutually exclusive, exhaustive, and balanced. Mutually exclusive means that responses categories do not overlap. Reflections and action 22.2. To continue with, suppose that you have to carry out a survey of waste disposal methods in your area. Construct a questionnaire specifying the type of questions you are going to include in questionnaire. 22 point issues in designing in a survey instrument. There are two most important issues which need to be kept in mind while designing a survey instrument. First is the reliability and second, the validity of the survey instrument. First, reliability. A reliable survey instrument is one that is relatively free from measurement error. Because of this error, the scores obtained from individual are different from their true scores, which can also be obtained from perfect measures that cause their error. What causes their error? In some cases, the error results from the measure itself. It may be difficult to understand or purely administrated. For example, a self-centered questionnaire on the value of preventive health care might produce unreliable results if its reading level is too high for the teenage mothers who are to use. If the reading level is on the target but the directions are unclear, the measure will be unreliable. Of course, the survey researchers would simply simplify the language and clarify the directions and still find measurement error. It is because measurement errors can also come directly from the examinees. For example, if teenage mothers are asked to complete questionnaires and they are especially anxious and fatigued, the obtained scores would differ from their true scores. There are 4 kinds of reliability discussed here in terms of survey research: stability, equivalence, homogeneity, and inter and intra-rate reliability. What is stability? Stability sometimes is called the test retest reliability. A measure is stable if the correlation between the scores from one time to another is high. Suppose a survey of students' attitudes was administered to the same group of students at a school A in April and then again in October. If the survey was reliable and no special program or intervention was introduced, then on an average we would expect the attitudes to remain the same. Equivalence. Equivalence or alternative form of reliability refers to which two items measures the same concept at the same level of difficulty. Suppose students are asked questions about their views towards technology before participating in a computer course. Again, 2 months after completing it, unless the researcher was certain that the item on the survey are equal, more favorable view on technology after the second survey would be reflect the survey's language level, for example, rather than the improved views. Homogeneity. Homogeneity refers to the extent to which all the items of questions assess the same skill characteristic or equality. Sometimes this type of reliability is referred to as an internal consistency. For example, suppose a researcher has created a questionnaire to find out about students' satisfaction with a textbook. An analysis of homogeneity will tell us the extent to which the item on the questionnaire focus on satisfaction. Inter and inter-writer reliability. Inter-writer reliability refers to the extent to which the two or more individuals agree. Intra-writer reliability refers to a single individual's consistency of measurement. Second, validity. Validity refers to the degree to which the survey instrument accesses what is purpose to measure. For example, a survey of a student attitude towards careers in information technology would be invalid if the survey only asked about their knowledge of the newest advances in software and hardware technologies. Simply an attitude to survey will not be considered valid unless you can prove that people who are identified as having a good attitude on the basis of their responses to the survey are different in some observable way from people who are identified as dissatisfied. 4 types of validity are often discussed: content, phase, criterion, and construct. Content. Content validity refers to the extent to which a measure thoroughly and appropriately assess the skills or characteristic it is intended to measure. For example, a researcher who is interested in mental health has to define the concept. What is mental health? How is health distinguished from the disease? And then write items that adequately contain all aspects of the definition so that the concept is well explained in terms of its measure. B. Phase. A phase validity refers to how a measure appears in the surface. Does it seems to ask all the needed questions? Does it use the appropriate language and language level to do so? Phase validity, unlike content validity, does not rely on established theory for support. Criterion. Criterion valid compares to responses to future performance or to those obtained from others more well-established surveys. Criterion validity is made up of 2 subcategories: predictive and concurrent. Predictive validity is the extent to which a measure forecasts future performance. Concurrent validity is demonstrated when 2 assessments agree on a new measure is compared favorably with or one is already considered valid. Construct validity is established experimentally to demonstrate that a survey distinguishes between people who do and do not have certain characteristics. For example, a researcher will have to prove in a scientific manner that satisfied respondents behaves differently from dissatisfied respondents. 22.5 Conclusion. Unit 22 discussed the details of survey instrumentation. It described the types of data collection techniques or instruments and their advantages and disadvantages, role of the interviewer bias, guidelines for constructing a questionnaire, and some principles to be kept in mind while preparing the questionnaire, and the issues of reliability and validity of the survey instrument. Each one of these items is an important for the success of survey research, as this stage is crucial to yield reliable and valid data. Thus, the development of survey instruments translate the research questions into a questionnaire, which then is used to generate data. Further reading. You have the book known as Surveying the Social World, Principles and Practices in Survey Research by Alan Aldridge and Ken Levine. So this is the end of the Unit 22. Thank you.